Holy cow, it is the last day of July. Just another day here at PFT PM as we get closer and closer to August 12, the return of PFT Live. A little bit of news coming up later in today's episode of PFT PM about maybe a little preview of what's to come on August 12th, but I digress. By the way, I have worn this polo shirt before, but I did iron it this morning, and I found myself ironing the back. Before I said, oh, who cares if the back's wrinkled? I'm not going anywhere, just doing this. And I don't know how unwrinkled the front is. I did my best. I'm not very skilled with an iron. I'm not very skilled with much of anything, as many of you have noticed lo these many years. All right, let's get right into it. The Dolphins have plenty of skills. You like that? See? The Dolphins have plenty of skills, but oftentimes what happens is when it's time to get nasty, when it's time to get mean, when it's time to get rough and tough, the Dolphins have failed to answer the bell, literally and figuratively, in recent years. And that's something that Sims and I have been harping on. The Dolphins need to get tougher. Well, Tyreek Hill is encouraged by the fact that there are practice fights happening for the Miami Dolphins, that it is a sign that the Dolphins are kind of behaving like other teams that Hill has been on. He's been on a championship team with the Kansas City Chiefs. You have to know how to turn it on and turn it off. It can't happen in the locker room. You kind of let it go on the practice field, but you show that you've got a little edge. You got a little spunk. You got a little something above and beyond X's and O's and running your routes and going back to the huddle and not being emotional, not letting your emotion, not letting toughness take over. And at the end of the day, no matter how safe football has gotten or will continue to get, as they push for 18 and then 19 and then 20 games, it's still a physical, violent sport. You are imposing your will on another human being, or maybe two, depending upon whether or not you're double teamed. So there has to be that fight. There has to be that edge. There has to be that something more than the play designs on paper and running and catching and throwing and basic blocking and tackling. There's got to be a street fight element if you want to be successful when the season progresses to single elimination. The Dolphins haven't been. Mike McDaniel, coach of the team, making a big deal about the number 24 because it's been 24 years since they've won a playoff game. Now, I think that is a very deft way of taking some of the heat off of McDaniel and his Dolphins being 0 for 2 when it comes to winning playoff games. Spread it out, push it back, blame the organization, not the recent past, but look what's happened to them in recent years. Bill Belichick's easy for him to say, Bill Belichick says football season starts at Thanksgiving. And what have we seen from the Dolphins post-Thanksgiving the past couple of years? They have, especially in December, they have slipped, they have slid, and they have exited the playoffs with road losses each time. And they would have avoided the deep freeze, the open-air meat locker in Kansas City if they had just closed the deal and won the division. So fading down the stretch of the regular season puts you in a tougher spot for the postseason, and one and done. And that's going to be the focal point. And the more that you keep coming back to the playoffs and losing, the more pressure there is each successive time. I remember the Bengals and Marvin Lewis going through this 10 years or so ago. They'd get back to the playoffs and then they'd lose. Then they'd get back and they'd lose. And the narrative kept getting louder and louder. When are you going to win in the postseason? That's going to be haunting the Dolphins this year. And there are rhythms to the calendar. And we get caught up in regular season mode, and we will be for an extended stretch. And then when you go to the playoffs, the whole vibe changes. And what you did during the regular season doesn't mean squat. What happens is we're right back in playoff mode, and we forget how playoff mode feels until we're back into playoff mode. It's the same feeling. You know, it's like the days of the week have a feel. Playoff time has a feel. And one of the realities of playoff time is we forget about the regular season. All that stuff that happened that entertained us from week 1 through week 18 is over. It's done. It's gone. It just determines where and when you're playing in the playoffs. But then it's, hey, new season. Win or go home. For the past 2 years, the Dolphins have gone home. And it's encouraging. If you're a Dolphins fan, it's encouraging to see some physicality, some fight, something that could make things different. Not just when they get to the playoffs, but on the path to the postseason that determines the when, the where, most specifically for them, the where, because they need those games at home. They don't need to be going to Buffalo. They don't need to be going to Kansas City. They don't need to be going to Cincinnati. They don't need to be going to Pittsburgh. They need to get the best teams in the conference coming to them. They don't need to be going to Cleveland. Don't want to piss off the Browns fans out there who think they may be sitting on something pretty good this year, because they might be if they get good quarterback play. Regardless, Dolphins need to be ready, especially if they do end up having to go on the road in the postseason. They need to be ready to go and put up a fight. And they need to be ready to be a little rough and tumble, a little mean, be the bullies. Don't get bullied. That's the way you advance in the postseason. Okay. Strange developments on Tuesday with the New England Patriots and linebacker Matthew Judon. And look, as far as I know, by the time you see this, we'll have some indication of what happened. But quick rewind. Monday, first day of pads, Matthew Judon, who had been participating in practice despite the fact that he wants a new contract, he's only making like $6.5 million this year, which is way too low. And how's he ever going to feed his family on $6.5 million? I don't want to hear that shit. Pardon me. Because for what he brings to the table, he's not getting enough. He needs a new deal. They haven't worked it out yet. So he participated in practices without pads. It's time to put the pads on. He's protecting himself. And based upon the video that we saw coming out of Patriots practice that day, it looked like Gerard Mayo, the head coach, wasn't thrilled with it. The conversation was borderline animated, borderline aggressive, borderline awkward. And there were passionate conversations also that occurred between Judon and Elliott Wolf, the de facto GM of the Patriots. Now, it's not his title, but it's essentially what he does. So he wasn't there on Tuesday. Mike Reese of ESPN.com, multiple players. He wasn't in the facility. And we don't know why he wasn't there. There's three explanations. Reese mentioned two, but I added the third one. One, Judon didn't show. Two, they told him to stay home. The third one is they agreed he wouldn't be there. Just a mutual, hey, you know what? This is probably for the best. Let's cool off for a day and let's figure this out. That's possible as well. But this underscores the point I made yesterday. A hold-in only works if the team is okay with it. You don't just show up and say, hey, you know what? I'm not practicing until I get a new contract. Team's got to say it's okay. Because you say, I'm not practicing. Team says, well, wait a minute. You are practicing. Everybody's practicing. This is what we're doing. You're here. You showed up to work. You're working. And if the team wants to play hardball, you can find the player for conduct detrimental to the team. You could eventually suspend the player for conduct detrimental to the team. There's all sorts of tools in the bag that the team has under the CBA. And if Judon just didn't show up, that's when the team can consider the nuclear option. And this is why I always say for players, it's far better to never show up than to show up and leave. Because if you show up and leave, what the team can do under the CBA is send what's called a 5-day letter. They call it a 5-day letter because the letter says, if you don't come back within 5 days, we reserve the right to put you on the reserve left squad list. And if that happens, you are shut down for the entire year. You can't play for anyone and you don't get paid. Now, it hurts the team because they don't have the player, but man, it hurts the player a lot more because the player isn't playing for anyone. The player is done. It is over. No football for you in 2024, even though you're perfectly healthy and ready to go. So it's the ultimate boss move for a team. And again, there's a little mutually assured destruction involved because the team loses the player, but it reminds the player of who's boss. That's why you don't see many guys show up and then leave. Because once you leave, the team has the hammer to bring you back. And if you don't come back within 5 days, you may not be coming back at all until next year at the earliest. And your contract kicks by a year. everything just gets delayed. You lose a year of your life. You're in no better position other than you are a year older. That's it. And you haven't played football. And the league will move on without you. Everybody realizes it moves on without you. Whether you retire, whether you're on the reserve left squad list, whether you're injured, football keeps rolling. The best example of it, Tom Brady, greatest player of all time, leaves. Football keeps going. And here comes another GOAT that everybody wants to talk about. And that's what makes, I'm digressing here, but there's a tie back to the Patriots. That's what makes Tom Brady's first year in the booth even more fascinating than it will be. All right, receivers trying to get paid. Brandon Ayuk still waiting. DJ Moore, out of the blue, gets a new contract with the Bears. 4 years added to the 2 years that he had left. He's been with the Bears 1 year. He was part of that trade last year that allowed the Panthers to move from 9-1 to get Bryce Young. That trade also allowed the Bears to get Caleb Williams. I mean, this may end up being, depending upon what Bryce Young becomes, depending upon what Caleb Williams becomes, this could be the worst trade of all time. Worse than Herschel Walker, worse than Russell Wilson, worse than any other trade that's ever been done. If Bryce Young is a bust and Caleb Williams becomes a short list top 5 franchise quarterback, that Bears-Panthers trade, well, best of all time for the Bears, worst of all time for the Panthers. That's the thing. For every horrible trade, there's another side to it saying, that's a pretty good trade. I'll do that again. We need more of those trades. Can we get some more of those trades, please? So anyway, Moore's contract, new money average, $27.5 million, well short of the top of the market. But look, I mean, it's smart for Moore to take this because you're going to have a handful of guys that justify mid-30s or close to it. And then you're going to have all the young players who have come in and will play well under their rookie contracts and aren't due for another deal for at least 3 years. Look at Malik Neighbors. I've mentioned this before. 6th overall pick, $29 million total for 4 years. Then you get the guys in the middle. And I think if you push too hard, you run the risk that the team says, we'll find somebody else. We'll draft somebody else. We'll sign somebody else. We're not going to pay you market value or close to market value because we can find somebody else who can do the job dollar for dollar better than you can do the job. Keenan Allen becomes an interesting dynamic on the receiver depth chart now that Moore is locked up for 6 years into the future. Allen's in the last year of his contract. What are the Bears going to do about him? They've got Rome Odunze. So it just is strange. For somebody who's been following football for more than 50 years, and hell, I mean, however long you've been following the sport, there's never been a time in your life that the Bears have had a great offense. The one time they won a Super Bowl, the offense didn't matter. The defense drove that bus. And maybe one of the reasons why they didn't become a dynasty is they didn't have the offense to complement that defense. And all those years they had Walter Payton as clearly the best weapon on offense in the NFL. They never developed a passing game to augment the reality that everyone on defense was trying to go get Walter Payton, and it would have opened up the passing game. They never were able to do that. Now, if Caleb Williams pans out, they're going to have something special. And they've got DJ Moore, who had a big year last year with Justin Fields at quarterback. Now, and Tyson Bagent when Fields was injured. Now, if Caleb Williams can be the guy they need him to be, things can be surprisingly potent on the offensive side of the ball for the Chicago Bears. We talked yesterday about the kickoff where Rich Bisaccia, the Packers special teams coordinator, said earlier in the week that he expects some amendments to the kickoff rule before the start of the regular season, based upon what we see in the preseason. And that was given some credence by the fact that teams were reminded they can't put the ball flat on the kicking tee, even though that's a rule that's been in place for a long time, and teams were reminded of it last year during the season before they even did this new kickoff formation. But apparently, as teams experiment with ways to get the ball to land between the goal line and the 20, that's where it's got to hit, but it's also got to stay in bounds. It's got to hit between the goal line and the 20, and it can't go out of bounds. If it goes out of bounds, the receiving team gets the ball at the 40. If it hits between the goal line and the 20 and goes into the end zone and isn't returned, the opposing team gets the ball at the 20. So we're talking about 10 yards of field position, because if you just kick it into the end zone or out of the end zone, and if it's into the end zone and not returned, you get it at the 30. So we're talking about 20 yards or 10 yards of field position difference. If you can make that ball hit and roll into the end zone, and not be returned. And remember, once it hits the electric football players, they can go. The difference between the old XFL rule and the NFL rule, XFL rule had to be touched. NFL rule, touched or touches the grass. The moment it hits the grass, the electric football players that are amassed on the receiving team's 40, 10 yards away from the blockers for the receiving team, who are also in the various positions of the electric football figures, until the kid flips the switch and they can go, off they go. So teams experimenting with different kicking styles to try to, I think that would be the goal. You want to kick it so it eludes the return specialist, hits the grass, and goes straight. And good luck with the football. Good luck predicting where the damn thing's going to go. But regardless, when that memo was sent earlier in the week, you combine that with what Bisaccia has said, and we're thinking, oh, there's going to be all sorts of tweaks. There's going to be all sorts of tinkering. I poked around yesterday because, as I said yesterday, at a certain point, you're getting into territory where you need the owners to vote on this. You can't just make whatever changes you want to the rules. That's why they do the off-season thing where they meet and they talk and they work and they come together, and then they go to Arizona or California or Florida for the league meetings, and they present it all to the owners, and the owners do whatever the hell they're going to do as long as 24 of them are willing to do it. You can't just start making changes. And I was told yesterday, as a practical matter, they don't expect to make many changes at all because they don't expect to see anything in the preseason that will be a sign of what's going to happen in the regular season. Because the expectation is that whatever teams are going to do to try to exploit the edges of the rule, and that's kind of what Bill Belichick always did, take it all the way to the edge, be aggressive, interpret the rules in a way that allows you to get the most advantage out of them possible for your team. They don't expect teams to be showing their hand in that regard in the preseason. Sean McVay, the Rams coach, said basically the same thing yesterday when he was talking to reporters. You don't expect to see what teams actually will do as of week one in the preseason. On one hand, hey, it's a great laboratory for experimenting with all the things you can do. On the other hand, you want to keep teams guessing. And look, I know I always say throw out whatever happens in week one because pretty much every team in the NFL is going to be far different by the time we get to week 18. But the outcome from week one can haunt you later. If you've been following PFT, PFT Live, PFT PM for any period of time, you know that the one red flag that I will plant based on week one is losing at home to a division rival, because you have to play that team later in their building. And if you get swept by a team in your division, good luck winning the division. Those are the only teams that should be like, oh crap, after week one. But if you can steal a win in week one, if you can unleash some funky strategy that you've developed in secret for how to deal with this new kickoff rule that nobody knows what the hell it's going to be or how it's going to work, you get that one moment, that one bolt of lightning that gives you a win that otherwise would be a loss. That could be all the difference in the world. That could be the difference between getting to the playoffs and not getting to the playoffs. That could be the difference between the 1 seed and having to play in the wild card round. It could ultimately be the difference between going to the Super Bowl and not going to the Super Bowl. And it's never going to be clear, but it's just another ingredient that goes into the stew that determines the outcome of a season. So don't expect many changes during the preseason, because don't expect many real clues as to how teams are going to push the limits, because that's why they would make changes. Somebody's pushing the limits of the rule and they're like, we didn't really want that. Let's make a tweak. And they do have some mechanism for mild alterations. But one thing that's not going to happen, the thing that I've been talking about for several weeks now, the touchback point for kicking the ball into the end zone and it not being returned or kicking it out of the end zone, it's going to be the 30, and that's not going to change without a full vote of the owners, and they just don't do that. They don't like to change rules during a season. And maybe what we'll see in the preseason, teams don't want to show anything at all, so they're just going to kick it out of the end zone. And it may be that based upon 3 weeks of the preseason, we don't see many returns at all. And more people catch on to the idea that, once we get to the regular season, they're just going to kick the ball out of the end zone and they're going to concede the 30-yard line, because if they think the average position with this new formation is going to be the 28 or the 29, just give the 30 and eliminate the risk of a touchdown or another long return that puts the opposing team in field goal position right out of the gates. So if that would happen, then maybe the change that we see before week 1 is they do move it back to the 35. They want to breathe life into the kickoff play. And my big concern is by changing, and remember when they went to Florida for the league meetings, the proposal was the 35. They changed it to the 30. Once they did that, they might have set the stage for teams just kicking it out of the end zone. So you combine that incentive with the disincentive to show your hand, we could see a lot of balls getting kicked out of the end zone in the preseason. We'll find out beginning on Thursday night. It's just 2 days away with the Hall of Fame game. That may spark some momentum toward, hey, let's have an emergency meeting by Zoom or whatever, 24 votes to move it to the 35 as of week 1. That wouldn't be impossible because you just play it out. One game at a time, one preseason week at a time. Hey, we're going to see what this new kickoff formation looks like. Here we go. Oh, he kicked it out of the end zone. All right, here they're kicking off again. Let's see what happens here. Everybody's in their electric football formation. It's kick it out of the end zone again. That could become a groundswell among fans, among media, and ultimately among owners to say, maybe we should move to the 35. But that's the only way it'll happen. If all the owners get together and have basically an emergency meeting because they aren't due to meet until October, and 24 of them are willing to tweak on the fly before week 1. Once the season starts, they don't like to make rule changes. They don't like to undermine the integrity of the season. Except when, as I mentioned yesterday, they decide they want to push John Gruden. Someone decides they want to weaponize emails to push John Gruden out of a job several weeks into a season and undermine the integrity of the entire season. That's the only exception that I can recall. All right, moving right along. Time to answer some questions. First question we're going to take today. I've been a little more organized with my effort to look at the questions, think about the questions. Not that it's going to be any better, but at least I'm trying. Part of it, too, goes along with this whole new, if you haven't noticed, this graphics package we're using. So when I change from one topic to another, boom, it's on the screen. I answer a question, boom, there it is. So let's start with this one. This comes from Hurricane Dave. How does payment work with the NFL Sunday Ticket class action lawsuit? If only a small number of people file to receive payment, do they get bigger slices of the pie, or does that not matter? Now, look, I haven't practiced law in 15 years, and I didn't handle many class actions, but there will be provisions for what happens with the residual money based upon those who ultimately can't or don't or won't claim it. However, this isn't a class action where you have to affirmatively opt in. You're in. If you meet the definition of what the class is, and we've posted the link to the website a few times that explains the Sunday Ticket class action. If you meet the criteria and you didn't opt out, you are in. And I know some people have said, well, how are they going to know that I bought it? I'm assuming in this day and age, it isn't all that difficult for DirecTV to go back and look through its records and find the people that bought DirecTV and what they paid for it. And then in turn, are you in the class? Are you not in the class? What do you get? What you don't get? That's part of the burden that the plaintiffs assumed by becoming the class action. And the court will be, I can only assume, very involved in making sure that everything is buttoned up properly. Now, that said, look, you could have checks sent out and last known address and it gets sent back, and you could have money that's never claimed. I don't know how that's all going to work. But, the bottom line is, if you had Sunday Ticket from 2011 through 2022, if you were a member of the class for the entire class period, 12 seasons, if this $4.7 billion verdict stands and becomes a $14.1 billion judgment, and then you throw on top of it pre-judgment interest, post-judgment interest, attorney's fees, et cetera, and then they carve it all up, you're going to get a decent check. It's not going to be anything to laugh at. you're going to end up with you're going to get a check. You're going to open it up and you're going to say, hey, oh, man, looks like Christmas is paid for this year, folks. So it's still a long way off. And today is the day. And it will have probably already happened by the time you see this video. But this is the day where they go back to court and the NFL tries to convince Judge Philip Gutierrez to throw out the whole case, to reduce the verdict to $1 or $0, or to have a new trial. There's also, the NFL is throwing everything they can at this. We want to win. And if we don't just flat out win, then reduce the verdict to $1. And if you don't do that, give us a new trial. And, the bottom line is, I don't think there's any way the judge is going to overturn the ruling on liability. I think there's more than enough, based on what I've seen in 2,000 pages, and yes, I'm up to 2,000, of the Sunday ticket trial transcript. There's more than enough evidence to support a jury verdict on the fact that the NFL violated the antitrust laws. The question is the damages calculation based upon some of the things the judge said during the trial. You could envision the judge saying that the witnesses that the plaintiffs called to put together their damages formulation were insufficient and they shouldn't have been allowed to testify. So after the fact, those witnesses are going to be disregarded. The verdict is out. And I don't think you just flush the whole case. I could see a new trial solely on the issue of damages, where the plaintiffs have to basically do a better job of proving this but-for world. And I don't know how good of a job you can do when it comes to that, because the real world was infected by an antitrust violation, where the NFL came together, 32 teams, sold the rights to DirecTV, wanted the price high enough so that people would say, I'll just watch CBS and Fox. That's the violation. The people who paid the price that was specifically rigged to get people to not buy Sunday Ticket were damaged because they ended up paying way too much for Sunday Ticket. That's the violation. That's the real world. So how do you ever construct an alternate universe that reliably predicts what you, if you had Sunday Ticket, would have paid? How do you ever do it? Especially because no matter what the plaintiffs do, the NFL is going to find fault with it. Oh, no, you can't do it that way. Well, how about this way? No, you can't do it that way. Well, what about that? No, that would never work. It's chaos. That word, I think, was programmed into the minds of every witness the NFL called. Oh, that would be chaos. Oh, no, we can't do that. That would be chaos. This would be chaos. That would be chaos. Look, they created the chaos by violating the antitrust laws, and the jury found that they did. At some point, somebody has to be able to say, this is a reasonable approximation of what it cost the 2.4 million residential customers who got screwed by being required to pay too much by this antitrust violation. But, that's the way trials go. Nobody ever agrees to anything important. They're going to fight on every important issue. And I guarantee you, if there's another new trial, whatever the plaintiffs put on by way of damages, the NFL is going to fight and fight and fight. The NFL didn't even put in their own. They didn't try to argue to the jury. And it's not easy, because it shows that maybe you agree that you violated the antitrust laws. But still, at some point, you got to understand, we got to try to thread this needle. Because if this thing goes sideways, we're at the mercy of whatever the jury decides to do. So we better at least, instead of just trying to say that the plaintiff's damages evidence is crap, we need to put on our own. And we need to say, hey, look, we firmly believe we didn't violate the antitrust laws, but this is what we think the world would look like if we had complied. This is the reasonable approximation. And again, they made the strategic decision not to do it. And I think part of it is they can't even entertain the possibility that they were wrong. And I still think, more than a month after getting whacked for a $4.7 billion verdict, they still won't concede they were wrong. And they won't even ponder a different reality where they don't have Sunday Ticket as the complimentary package to the in-market CBS and Fox games. But, I keep thinking about different ways they could do it. And there's some exciting possibilities that could allow all of us to watch every game without having to give YouTube TV or anyone else an extra $400 or whatever the thing costs. So today's the day that they go to court. Highly unlikely the judge is going to issue any rulings from the bench, but he could. And there's two other issues that I noticed today in Sports Business Journal, and I think it's important. One, the judge has final say on the appeal bond. And if we're talking about $14.1 billion, and definitely it's going to be appealed, there's a certain amount of money that the NFL has to come up with, and that's not going to be an insignificant amount of money. There was an appeal bond issue in a different context earlier this year that was a sliver of $14.1 billion, and that created a lot of angst and concern. So that's part of it. And also something the judge could do, and he wouldn't do it today, but the judge could issue an order telling the league to stop it with Sunday Ticket. Now, I don't think the judge would tell them what to do instead, but what the judge could do is say to the NFL, you want chaos? If the judge says to the NFL before week 1 of the 2024 season, stop Sunday Ticket, holy shit, what comes next? I don't know. Now, look, the NFL and these legal issues can become PR issues as well. The NFL could just cut off its nose to spite its face and say no Sunday Ticket this year. See what you get? See what you get, plaintiffs? See, you don't like the way we provide you with out-of-market games. We just won't give you out-of-market games. How do you like that? I don't know if that's in the NFL's interest to give up the $2 billion that it's due to make from YouTube TV this year, but it is possible. It is possible that the judge will issue an injunction saying you must, by court order, you must disband Sunday Ticket. Now, the league might say, I might even try to get an emergency stay. There's all sorts of things they can do. They can go to the appeals court and say, can we get a stay of the judge's injunction pending appeal? This is going to create irreparable harm to us. We have these contracts in place. Expectations need to be satisfied. We understand that if this is a violation of the antitrust laws, we have to pay even more money later. So it can get very interesting. Very interesting. There's a lot of different ways it can go. And as I may have mentioned the other day, I'm not as pessimistic about the plaintiffs prevailing as I was based upon the reporting that happened the day the judge kind of had a little hissy fit and said some things derogatory about the way the plaintiffs were putting in their case, because I think that the plaintiffs' lawyers did a nice job of talking him back from the ledge. And at the end of the day, judges like to respect jury verdicts. The jurors come in, they give their personal time, they pay attention, they issue a decision. Most judges want to respect the verdict of a jury, and they feel like they need to respect the verdict of a jury. And the jury here spoke as loudly as any jury has ever spoken in any civil action that has ever been filed against any American sports league. Next question. Brandon McKinney. This one made me laugh a little bit. If you had the glorious opportunity to time travel, would you continue practicing law for all those years, or would you have jumped ahead and sought out an NFL gig sooner? Look, hey, Brandon, I didn't have any plans. So if I would change any of the facts and if I would rip a little hole in the space-time continuum, this probably wouldn't have happened at all. That's the thing about what you want to do and what happens. You can go into your life saying, these are my goals. And while pursuing the things that you want to do, other stuff happens. And you may want to climb this mountain, and you keep climbing and pushing and working and striving, and you wake up one day and you're on a different mountain. Like, how'd that happen? So I think it worked out just fine. And I think everything that I learned while going to law school and practicing law and grinding and working, and I think that helped me get to where I feel comfortable. Now, I remember when I first started covering the NFL, it's like, how can I do this without journalism training, without a degree in journalism, without any experience in journalism? How can I do this? And after a while, it's like, how would I have ever done this without a law degree? There were so many issues that I would have been like, what the hell does that mean? So I wouldn't change a thing. I would not change a thing, because I think if you change a thing, there's a chance that you wake up and the thing that ultimately happened didn't, and you're left to wonder what the hell. So, but it's interesting to think about it, because I mean, I didn't even start PFT. I didn't flip the switch until 2001. I was 36 by then, and then I did both for a while. And you get to a point where you got to pick a horse. This is one of the reasons why I think that full-time officials would be so much better than part-time officials. You get to a point where you realize, no matter how hard I work, I'm still diluting my focus between these two things. When the hobby gets bigger and bigger and it's two full-time jobs. It's one thing to have a hobby. I mean, my hobby now, I like to write on the side, but it's not like a full-time job. When you have two things that are full-time jobs, you get to a point where it's like, I got to pick a lane here. And NBC made that easier for me in 2009 when they said, we want to partner with you and we want you to stop practicing law. And I was like, no, please, no. I really want to keep practicing law. So it all worked out. I wouldn't change a thing. To finally answer the question in a word, I would change nothing. That's not one word, but you get my point. All right. This is from Cousin Vin. If you had to pick a job for Bill Belichick, Giants, Eagles, or Dallas, I think he'd like to coach the Giants. Deep down, I think he'd like to coach the Giants. He won a couple of Super Bowls as a defensive coordinator with the Giants. When there was that reporting from Seth Wickersham of ESPN.com several years ago in the aftermath of the Garoppolo trade, this palace intrigue, and maybe Belichick wants out. Gary Myers, who's covered the Giants forever, said Belichick would like to go to the Giants. I think that if he had to choose between the three, he'd go to the Giants, especially because I think he could go in and run the show with the Giants. Because if they stink this year and they think they could get Bill Belichick, and they know if they don't make a play for him, they may have to deal with him in the division, blow everything out. Sorry, Brian Daboll and Joe Shane, but this is how it could go. They know this. It's a big boy league. They know there's a chance that ownership is going to decide to make big changes based upon what happens in any given season. Blow everybody out and bring in Belichick. And it's more plausible that he'd be given the keys in New York than in Dallas or Philadelphia. So I think if he was being completely candid, he would say of those three teams, the Giants would be the choice. And all this interest from the Cowboys and the Eagles might just grease the skids for Bill Belichick to end up coaching the Giants as his next and probably final act as a head coach in the National Football League. Next question from WC. When is Sims going to be back? Drum roll, please. Tomorrow. Thursday's PFT PM. Sims will join me. And apparently next week, he's going to be with me for a couple of times too. We're kind of getting back on the bike. It's been a while. We're getting ready for the August 12th return to PFT Live. But Thursday's PFT PM, it will be me and it will be Sims. So get ready. I can't wait. Because there's just a lot of stuff that's happening. I've been in touch with him. We text and bounce different ideas off of each other, but that's different from actually talking in this format where we go back and forth. And it's a true connective tissue type of conversation. It's not like you'll see some of these debate shows. It's a monologue and a monologue and no dialogue. Those of you that watch PFT Live know that Chris and I will come together with a back and forth that ultimately creates for both of us some different ideas, different ways of thinking. And it all happens organically and authentically, and it happens again starting tomorrow, just for one day. Remember, he doesn't work Fridays. You know that by now. But next week, we may see him a couple of times too. The week after that, August 12th, that is when we get rolling with PFT Live. Back 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern, Peacock, Sirius XM 85, Sky Sports, whenever they put us on, and podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Next question, Tyler Wong. Do we have a great chance of NFL players participating in flag football for the 2028 Olympics? We have heard from plenty of players who would like to do it. Now, I don't know enough about flag football to know how transferable the skill sets are. There are only certain positions, quarterback and receiver, that probably make sense in flag football. You're not going to see many linemen playing flag football, but there will be, I think, a lot of players that want to do it. The league will want them to do it because the league is all in with flag football. The teams might not be thrilled about lending their players to flag football, to the Olympics, and risking injury to those players. That's, I think, the one thing that could become a major obstacle. You think Mike Brown's going to want to loan Joe Burrow to the Olympics for flag football? What's in it for Mike Brown, other than the risk that he's not going to have Joe Burrow play quarterback for all of the 2028 season? So I think what the owners want as it relates individually to their teams is going to be balanced against what the league wants as it relates to the growth of flag football and the proliferation of flag football. And I think the NFL believes that flag football ties to tackle football and globalizes the sport that way. They've been trying to globalize tackle football. They've realized you globalize flag football and maybe tackle football follows. I think they're never going to come out and say what their plan really is. I think at some level, they're all in with flag football in the event that we get to the point where people do say there's no safe way to play football. We're just done playing football. Well, okay, here, flag football is ready to go. I mean, there's a lot of different motivations, and maybe that's the answer. For a lot of reasons, the NFL is behind flag football because it can augment tackle football. It makes it easier to globalize the sport, and a fallback is in place in the event that tackle football ever goes the way of the dodo bird. The only downside is, and I've had people in the league express this concern, if you start pushing players from tackle to flag, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the next thing you know, you don't have enough highly skilled tackle football players. Flag football becomes more compelling, more interesting. We get used to it because it's been forced down our throats. I mean, right now, I don't care to watch flag football. If everywhere I look, there's flag football, at some point I'm going to give it a chance and maybe it takes root. And I say, okay, I kind of like flag football now. I still don't believe a broad, mainstream, widespread audience is going to accept it, even as an Olympic event. Because look at all these Olympic events that we get caught up in for 2 weeks every 4 years. The rest of the time, we don't care. I mean, a mainstream audience for 3 years and 50 weeks doesn't care about gymnastics, doesn't care about track and field, doesn't care about swimming. Mainstream, broad audience. But it all comes together for the Olympics. And I think flag football may be the same way. Flag football, yes, for those 2 weeks every 4 years. The rest of the time, well, we don't really care. We'll see. We'll see. It's a long-term play, I think. It's part of the NFL's long-term play to globalize the entire sport. Trevor Van Stratton, can you explain to me, like I'm 5, why people worship at the altar of Sean Payton but never miss a chance to clown on Mike McCarthy when McCarthy clearly has the better coaching resume? Well, look, let me try it this way. For years, Mike McCarthy had the benefit of one of the all-time great quarterback talents in football history. For years. And what does he have to show for it? In contrast, Sean Payton hitched his wagon to a guy who's about 6 feet tall, isn't a naturally skilled thrower of the football, but willed himself to become one of the all-time greats. The performance for Drew Brees is undeniable. But I think a lot of that was Payton helping Brees reach a higher level of performance than his physical traits would have ever suggested. With Rodgers, it feels like he's underachieved. Brees overachieves, Rodgers underachieves. Payton helped Brees overachieve, McCarthy responsible for Rodgers underachieving. I think a 5-year-old would maybe understand that. If I can understand it, a 5-year-old can understand it. Niners NE, how long can a player hold out before they have to come back to get credit for the season? Well, look, for all players, if you don't show up, if you don't report, it used to be you had until 30 days before the first regular season game if you held out to get credit for a year of service toward becoming a free agent. We will rarely see guys who have yet to get their 4 years of credit for free agency hold out. It could still happen, but it won't happen as often as it used to. Setting that aside, the necessity to show up while you're under contract to get a year's credit toward free agency. The other side of it, it's usually the Tuesday after week 10. There are different devices the team has that it can use to press you to come back sooner than that, but typically it's the Tuesday after week 10. If you don't show up by then, everything kicks to the next year. If you show up before then, you get credit for this year's contract. You don't get paid for the weeks you weren't there, but if you're in year 4 of your contract, the next year you're eligible for free agency, unless you were a rookie and they got the 5th-year option. But Tuesday after week 10, that's usually the key date. But there's things they can do with like exempt lists. You may have to show up a few weeks sooner. We've seen that play out from time to time. A few weeks sooner, we've seen that play out from time to time. So we don't see many holdouts last deep into the regular season. Usually, at worst, a guy will miss a game check or two before realizing that's a lot of money. It's never coming back. That's a lot of money, and it's never coming back. And I think anytime it lingers well beyond that, then we start getting into the possibility of teams just going to say, we got to trade this guy. Remember Dwayne Brown when he held out from the Texans several years ago, held out, and eventually we just got to trade this guy. So you don't see very often a guy hold out as long as he can, come back to the team. It's happened, but it doesn't happen often. Holds out, comes back, finishes the year, and then we do it all again next year. If it ever gets to that point where it boils over into a holdout that lasts into the regular season, I think both sides are inclined to come up with something final and not kick it until next year. Question from Frederick Elliott, who asked a lot of Eagle-related questions, a lot of them, and then at some point acknowledged, I just realized this isn't an Eagles page. But here's the one I'll answer from Frederick Elliott. Do you think Saquon Barkley will have a Christian McCaffrey type effect on the Eagles? Do we have our very own CMC now? Quite possibly. Now, look, he's got to stay healthy. But I think this is one of the reasons why the Giants are so freaked out about the fact that Barkley stayed in the division with a team like the Eagles that hasn't had a great running back. They've done this smattering of guys. And DeAndre Swift emerged, but look how quickly they let him walk out the door because they knew they were getting Saquon. I think Saquon could be great in that offense. And the Eagles have some other issues they got to iron out after the way things ended last year. But Saquon is still a great player. And I think about that first episode of Hard Knocks offseason with the Giants and the consternation, the angst that was displayed by some when they were talking about what to do with Saquon. There was a belief there that this guy's still great. This isn't run-of-the-mill, we can throw a rock and find a running back. This guy's special. He's still special. And now the Giants have to deal with his high-level skills as a member of the Eagles. And if he stays healthy and has a huge year, that's going to be one of the factors that could lead to some major changes happening for the New York Giants, because it's just an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment to the Giants. The better Barkley plays in Philly, and I think he could, the more embarrassing it is to the Giants that didn't bring him back. And that's going to leave a mark. And that's another step on the way to possibly Bill Belichick being the coach and essentially GM of the team next year. Important question from Don Ridenauer. Are you going to get a writer to do a Monday morning column or just no? This relates to the retirement of Peter King. He did Football Morning in America. We featured it at PFT from the time that he jumped from SI.com, 2017, 2018 or thereabouts. I think that no one can replace Peter. And all due respect to anybody out there that does a Monday column, Peter did it in a way that can't be replicated. And I don't know that in today's media climate should be replicated. There was so much stuff in Peter's column that could have been broken out as separate stories. And that was the way Peter always did it. I don't quibble with that. It ain't broke. Don't fix it. But our style is to focus on one topic at a time, not have one long column that touches on a bunch of different things. One of the things I always try to encourage our writers to do, if you see a story, a long read from ESPN.com, they'll pop them out from time to time. The Athletic, a long read. We mine it for here's a story, here's a story, here's a story, here's a story, because there's a lot of different angles. And I think different concepts stand alone. So our preference is going to be to continue to cover the NFL the way we always have. Here's a story, here's a story, here's a story, here's a story. Not here's one long column of 10,000 words that touches on 20 different things. We'll just give you 20 different columns, 20 different articles, 20 different items. So I don't anticipate replacing Peter King, in part because I don't think he can be replaced, but also in part because for the folks that we have, it makes more sense to do what we've always done. One topic, keep it short, digestible, move on, a reflection of our collective attention span in this day and age. All right, a couple more before we wrap it up. John Ardell, Do you think teams will attempt to use the guardian cap as a barrier to block the view of offenses or defenses? 5 tall guys, helmets twice as wide. If your height challenge is potentially going to be an issue, plays might get called specifically to block views. I hadn't thought about it that way, but you think about some of these 6'7", 6'8" offensive linemen, you throw the guardian cap on top of the helmet. Good luck, Kyler Murray, figuring out where you're going to throw the ball. So, last year, the NFL's position was guardian caps work, but players aren't allowed to wear them during games. This year, the NFL's position is wear them if you want to. And you would assume that players are only going to wear them if they feel like it makes them safer. It's now potentially a strategic tool. And that's what this question speaks to. You could have coaches say, hey, put all the defensive linemen in guardian caps. It'll make it harder for the 6-foot quarterback to see down the field. And you wonder whether some weeks you'll wear one and some weeks you won't. I don't know. But everything is strategic when it comes to football. There's a reason for everything you do. And more than just what is the benefit to me as the player from the guardian cap is going to go into the formula that teams and players will use to decide who should or shouldn't wear it. Because at the end of the day, the coaches run the show. And if coach doesn't want you to wear it, you're probably not going to wear it. Coach wants you to wear it, you're probably going to wear it. But get used to it. Get ready for it. And it'll be very interesting to see on Thursday night, Hall of Fame game, how many players are wearing it during the game. And I submit to you that we'll see more in the preseason than we might see in the regular season, just because this is the way to get an idea of what this would feel like to have this thing on while you're playing a game. And I think it's also a good experiment from the league's perspective to see how people react. And also, it's not going anywhere. So we got to start getting used to it. So we might as well start getting used to it with the Hall of Fame game and the rest of the preseason. Here's a good question from Chuck. When the NFL goes to 18 games, how will the 18th opponent be selected? And if it's by previous year division standings, would that start to make too much of a competitive imbalance from a first-place team playing 4 first-place teams and the last-place team playing 4 last-place teams? Look, I think that that's the easiest and most sensible way to do it. And I don't think there's enough of a reflection in the schedule of first place, second place, third place, fourth place in the division. Now, here's the current scheduling formula for every team. Well, let me go when it was 16 games. When it's 16 games, you play every team in your division twice. You play every team in one of the other divisions in your conference. That's 4 more games. You play every team from the same division in the other conference. That's 4 more games, and it rotates every year. So if you're in the NFC North, okay, I play the other 3 teams twice. I play this year every team from and I don't know what it is this year, but I'm just using this as an example. Every team from the NFC West, that gets me to 10 games. Every team from the AFC North, that gets me to 14 games. And then the other 2 games were the teams from the other 2 divisions in your conference that finished in the same spot you did. So that was really the only variation with 16 games. The first place team in the division is playing the first place team from the 2 other divisions in the same conference, apart from the division where you play all 4 teams anyway. Second place team plays the 2 second place teams, third place, the 2 third place teams, fourth place, the 2 fourth place teams. Add the 17th game, and what they did was, on a rotational basis, one of the divisions from the other conference, you pick one, the formula picks one, first place plays first place, second place plays second place, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why Aaron Rodgers almost went back to Lambeau Field this year, but the Jets and the Packers didn't finish in the same spot. It's Jets and the Vikings both in third place, I believe, in their respective divisions. And it's Jets at Vikings, which also happens to be in England. But it's Jets at Vikings this year. It would have been Jets at Packers, and that game would have, oh boy, that would have been a hell of a regular season game. Aaron Rodgers back in Green Bay. So if you go 18 games, okay, you look at the other conference. You got one division where you play all 4 teams. You got 3 divisions left. You have one division where, on a rotational basis, you're playing the team that finished where you did. So you just pick another division. So it's another interconference game. You end up with 6 interconference games out of 18. 12 in your conference, 6 in the other conference. All 4 from one division and 2 other teams based upon the finish. And yeah, so now we have 4 games out of 18 where who you play is driven by where you finished in the division the prior year. 4 games. The NFL is going to want that because that just contributes to this opportunity for bad teams to get better and good teams to get dragged down by their success last year, because that's what the NFL ultimately wants. That's one thing that is abundantly clear from the Sunday Ticket trial transcript. They want everybody to be packed together. They want every game to be close. They want every game to be exciting. They know viewership is higher when the games are close, and interest is higher when the teams are close. You know, I see it as the season unfolds. When teams begin to drop out of contention, the stories relating to that team get far less traffic than they used to get. The league wants everyone to be clustered together as long as possible, and they want the playoff berths, the bye weeks. They want everything to come down to the last week of the regular season. That's the NFL that Pete Rozelle envisioned back in the 70s when the Steelers were kicking the crap out of everybody. And we had, a small handful of great teams that were running roughshod over everyone else. Pete Rozelle didn't want that. The NFL's vision is close games, exciting seasons, keep them all packed together. And this formula for the 18th game, just pick another division from the other conference, and if you finish first, you play that champion. It makes for other great games that can be offered up too. I think that's the no-brainer. And then if they would go to 19 games, when they go to 19 games, boom, there's still one division left in the other conference. So if you finish in first place in your division, you are guaranteed, if we get to 19, to play every other team that finished in first place in their division the next year. Or I should say, when we get to 19. All right, let's get this wrapped up. I had one more question. You know what? It's simple, so I'll answer it. This is from Hafe PFT. Do teams that trade their players instead of releasing them have to still pay the guaranteed money? For example, the Goff trade was to save cap from his contract, but the Rams were still dealt $22 million in dead cap. Love the show all the way from Saudi Arabia. So I wanted to get that one in. We appreciate anybody who's beyond the borders of the United States who engages with our content. Hello, Saudi Arabia. Here's the question. And maybe it's somebody in Saudi Arabia who's like trying to figure this all out before they come in and try to buy the whole league. Who knows? But if there's guaranteed money left on a contract, that goes to the new team. The dead cap charge relates to the money that's already been paid to the player by way of signing bonus and other payments that get spread over multiple years. That's what hits your cap. You don't pay another penny to the player once you trade him. The new team takes on that obligation. They stand in your shoes going forward. That's why the Rams wanted to get rid of the Goff contract. There were guarantees in 21 and 22, and they didn't want to get saddled with that, so they bit the bullet and they gave up a first-round pick as a practical matter to get Goff off the books, and the Lions inherited his guaranteed salary. So the dead cap charge costs you nothing. That, if anything, you save money. It's less money you can spend this year because you're taking the dead cap charge for dollars that would have hit the cap in future years. They reflect dollars you've already spent. The guaranteed money in the future, that gets pushed off to another team. I hope that answers your question. Hello again to Saudi Arabia, and hello to everyone out there who takes some time to check out what we have to say here at PFT PM, ProFootballTalk.com. Remember, tomorrow, Sims back in the house. We'll see you then. Thanks as always for some of your time. Have a great Wednesday. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.